is I have all my toppings for when we actually go to make the pizza. I have everything already, all the veggies are already chopped up, the bacon and the mushrooms, everything's all sauteed and cooked and ready to go right on the pizza. And that's because once we put the pizza on the peel and try to get in the oven, we want to do that step as fast as possible so that we don't have it stick to the peel, because then you can have a big mess. So I've pre-recorded a video of me making the dough and weighing out the ingredients, mixing the dough, and then the video is also going to show you how to portion the dough and shape it into dough balls and get it ready to proof. And then we'll come back live and I'll show you how to stretch out the dough and how to get it on the peel, add your toppings, and then eventually how to get it in the oven and bake it. And then most importantly, you'll get to eat it. So, well, you won't get to eat it tonight because this is virtual, but so if you do have any questions, just type them in the comments and Stephanie will relay them to me, and then I'll try to answer them as we go along. And I think we're ready to start the video.
Here's what you need to make your dough. A lid, a few mixing bowls, a whisk, a wooden spoon, and a dough scraper. Now we're ready to make the dough. Here's the recipe that we'll be using to make dough tonight. I've tried many recipes over the years, trying to find one that works consistently well in a home oven, and this is by far the best. It's from Joe Badia's cookbook, Pizza Camp. Two of the things that make it really good are the overnight fermentation, which adds character and flavor to the dough, and the baking method, which we'll get into later. I like to weigh the ingredients using a kitchen scale, but I've also provided the cup measurements, which work just as well. This makes 2 1-pound dough balls, which will make 2 16-inch pizzas. So now we're ready to measure out our ingredients for the dough. First thing I always measure out is the flour. So I'm using a combination of King Arthur bread flour and Castle Valley Mill whole wheat flour. I use 60% King Arthur bread. I'm going to go ahead and get that in the bowl. The reason I use a combination is I really like the added flavor that the Castle Valley Mill flour brings. Castle Valley is a company out of Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and they've been milling grain since 1730. And they use locally grown, and it's freshly milled. So when you get a bag, it has the date on it of when it was actually milled, so you know how long it's been sitting around, as opposed to like the grocery store where you have no idea how long that flour's been on the shelf. And it really does have a major impact on the final flavor of your dough. All right. So there we go. I have the flour all measured out. I'm going to set that aside. Next, I always measure out the yeast. So the yeast we're using is a dry instant yeast. So get that going right there. Okay, and I always combine the yeast and the sugar because they get whisked into the water at the same time. So we're going to add our sugar as well. And the sugar is going to be like that, basically help jumpstart the yeast into action. All right, so we got our sugar and yeast in this bowl. Next, we're going to measure out the salt. I always keep the salt separate because that gets mixed in last. So the salt, I use kosher salt. Go ahead with. All right, there we go. Next, we're going to measure out our water. So the water, I usually try to get it around 90 degrees. I use a probe thermometer. And then that's the perfect temperature I always find to help activate the yeast and get it kicked into gear. And the last thing we're going to measure out is our olive oil. I just sort of eyeball this because I've been doing it a long time. There we go. All right, now we have all our ingredients measured out and ready to be mixed. All right, so now we're ready to mix together our dough. So the first step that I always take is to thoroughly mix together the two flours to make sure they're combined. Once you're happy with how they are mixed together, then you set that bowl aside. Then we're going to take our bowl with our water in it, and we're going to add the sugar and yeast. Make sure we whisk that together really well. You want to make sure that the yeast and the sugar are both fully dissolved. Sometimes I like to tilt the bowl up and make sure there's nothing stuck to the bottom. Sometimes I take a break for a few seconds. All right, so all that is nice and dissolved. Now we're going to add our olive oil. All right, now we're ready to add that to our flour. So I always make a little well in the middle for where the water's going to go. Add the water. And then I prefer to use a wooden spoon just because I've broken plastic spatulas before trying to do this step. Just to get started. You want to imagine that if you've ever used a KitchenAid to make a dough, you're imagining the first speed of a KitchenAid, mixing those ingredients together into a dough. There we go. The trick with this step is you want to make sure that there's no flour that is left dry. So you want to mix it really well like this. And then once you get to about this step where the dough is starting to come together and it's not sticking to the sides of the bowl, then I'll switch to mixing with my hand just because that's easier. So I'll take the dough that's stuck to the spoon off. And then I'm using my fingertips to scrape the dough off the sides to make sure that everything is nice and combined. Going in, turning the bowl in a circle with my right hand. And then I'm folding the dough over, kneading it. Now I'm squeezing it with in between my fingers. You just want to make sure that everything is thoroughly combined and there's no dry spots, because that will mess up your final dough. Right. It doesn't have to be in a dough ball or anything right now. You just want to get to this point where everything is nice and mixed together in one big mass. And then you're going to cover with plastic wrap or with a kitchen towel and let it rest for half an hour before we add our salt. All right, so now our dough has rested for 30 minutes. We're going to uncover it, and we are ready to mix in the salt. So first thing I do is I sprinkle the salt that's already measured out evenly over the top of the dough. Then I always do this step next to the sink so I can have the water running, so I can get a little bit of water on my fingers so that it doesn't stick to my hands. And then I'm going to start folding. Grab from the edge and fold it towards the middle, just like this. Get my hand a little bit wet again. Keep folding, keep folding. And then when you get to this, when you've folded it fully on top of itself, you're going to get both hands wet, and you're going to do what I call the pincher method. So you take a little bit of dough like this, and you pinch it off. You don't have to completely separate it from the rest of the dough. Just like that, you're going to pinch it. And this is really going to help incorporate that salt into all the parts of the dough. Keep pinching, pinching till you get to the end of the dough ball. And then when you've pinched it, then you're going to fold it back on itself again. Same method as before, where you're taking from the edge towards the middle. And then we're going to repeat that pinching just to make sure that this salt is really in all parts of the dough. Sometimes you can still feel the texture of the salt. I get really incorporated. Okay. Then after you've done the second pinch and you folded just like this, then I like to pick it up and sort of turn it slowly, so I'm sort of making it into a big dough ball now. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you're going to tuck that seam side to the bottom of the bowl. And then when it looks like somewhat in a dough ball shape, you're ready to cover it with plastic and put it in the refrigerator overnight. All right, so now we have our dough that's been in the refrigerator overnight. We're going to uncover it like this. Now, first thing I always do is I have a bowl of flour ready right next to it, and I sprinkle flour all over the dough. You want it to sit at room temperature for about 30 to 40 minutes before this step, just so it's not ice cold right out of the fridge. It makes it easier to work with. And then I'm going to take the flour bowl and put my hands and cover my fingers with flour so that I can start to work my way around the bowl, turning the bowl. Add a little more flour. If there's some liquid along the edge of the bowl, that's fine. You're going to start, you just want to unstick it from the bowl and be able to get underneath it so you can lift it out onto the table. But you don't want to fold it, you don't want to flip the bowl over, because I like to keep this the top. It just makes it easier when you go to portion it. A little more flour under there. See how it's starting to come away from the bowl? Now, when it's like this, you're going to be able to get it completely out of the bowl. So now, I'm going to flour the work surface. And we're going to lift the dough out just like that. All right. Now I like to sort of work it a little bit. Try to get it into sort of a rectangle shape. That way it just makes it easier when I go to cut it and roll it into dough balls. All right, so then I'm also going to put some flour in the Tupperware container so it's ready for when the dough balls are rolled and they go in there. So now to portion it, you can either use a scale if you want a precise measurement. This is a double batch of the recipe that I provided, so it's going to make 4 dough balls. Your recipe will yield 2, so you would just cut yours directly in half. I'm going to cut mine in half. And I'll set half aside. And then we'll take this half of the dough and cut it in half again to make our 2 dough balls. Doesn't have to be exact. One pizza is slightly bigger than the other. So now we're going to take that rectangle that we have and we're going to fold it. See how you're folding in half? And then you're going to turn it a quarter of a turn and fold it again. Turn and fold, turn and fold. You want to be careful that you don't rip the dough while you're doing this. And then you're going to do that about 7 or 8 times until you have this. And then you're going to use your hand to gather it up. And then you're going to use this hand like you're screwing in a light bulb, and this hand you're pinching the top of the light bulb. If you can leave those bubbles, that's fine. But as long as you don't tear the smooth surface of the dough, you're good. If the dough is cold right out of the refrigerator, then there's more of a chance of it to tear. So once you feel like you have this dough, you have it pretty well closed. You want to make sure it's as closed as possible. Sometimes I put a little flour on the bottom, and then we'll put it in our container. If you don't close that bottom, here I'll show you again on this one. If you don't close that bottom, then you'll have a weak spot in your pizza when you go to stretch out the dough later, and it could tear, and that could make a hole, and then you'll have a big mess in your oven. All right, so we're turning the light bulb and squeezing. I'll put a little bit of flour in my hand just because it was a little bit sticky. Turning and squeezing, turning and squeezing. You sort of want like, almost like the pincher method that we used when we were making the actual dough. You're a little more flour. This one's a little bit wetter than the other one. And then that's it. So then there's your second dough ball. We'll put that one on the flour Tupperware as well. At this point, we want to cover the dough, and you can either leave it out at room temperature for about 2 hours to proof, and then it will be ready to bake, or you can put it in the refrigerator for as long as overnight. Just remember to pull it out about 2 hours before you want to bake it to give it time to proof.
You guys hear me?
Hold on 1 second. I'm unmuting the other mic. We're good now.
All right, so you guys can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh.
You're unmuted. You're good.
All right. So now we're ready to stretch out that dough. Need to mute that.
I got it.
All right, thanks. All right, so this is the dough that we made, and it's been proofing for about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer. So the way you want to check to make sure that it's properly proofed is I sprinkle a little flour on top of the dough, and then I take my finger, which is covered in flour, and I push into it. And if it slowly bounces back, springs back like that, that's perfect. If it springs back right away and it's still a little firm, that means it needs a little more time. Give it like 10 or 15 minutes and check it again. And if it stays dented like this one is a little bit, I mean, it's slightly overproof, but it'll still work for our purposes. So I take my bench scraper. I make sure there's a good amount of flour so it's not going to stick. And I'm going to get under that dough and flip it into our bowl of flour. And this is just the King Arthur bread flour that I have here for dusting. And so I flip it over, make sure both sides and all around the edges are well floured. Then I take a little bit of flour and I sprinkle it onto the peel so it doesn't stick and onto our work surface. And I put the dough down. Now we're going to stretch out the pizza, but we're going to be careful not to touch the edges. We're going to leave about, I'd say, 1 inch of crust. So we're going to press down on the middle a little bit. You can turn it, make sure it's not going to stick to your countertop. So this is stretching really easily, so it's either perfectly proofed or maybe slightly over, but it'll still work. So then I turn a little bit, and I use my hands to sort of build that crust, being careful to leave a good amount of the dough untouched. You don't want to press all the air out. So then this is perfect, just like this. I'm going to sprinkle this side with flour. I'm going to flip it over. And then I use this hand, the heel of my hand, to hold the dough. And this one, I'm going to pull the heel of this hand to stretch it. So, and you're turning it as you do this. And if you have a nice floured work surface, it won't stick at all. And so that's all you're going to do. It's about, 8 or 9 inches in a circle. It doesn't have to be a circle. So then I'm going to pick it up, hold it over my hand, and then I'm going to toss it into my other hand, and the weight of the dough is actually going to start stretching itself. So just like this. And then my next step, I'll put it down for this so I can show you. My hands are going to be open like this, fingers all spread apart, and I'm going to slowly move the dough and let the weight of the dough stretch itself, and we're going to pull our hands apart gently. You don't have to be fancy and toss it in the air or anything like that. And if you have any big diamond wedding rings, I would take them off because they will tear a hole in your dough. So now, just like this, You're going to toss, and you don't have to even lift it off your hand. Leave it on one hand as you move your hands around, just like this. And you're still trying to be mindful of that crust so you don't push too much out of the crust. And then you want to stretch it. This is fine. You can even go a little bit bigger, but you don't want to make sure you don't go bigger than the size of your peel, because then it'll be harder to get in the oven. So then once we have it like that, we're going to have a nice bubble here where that air still is. So then this pizza we're going to make is going to be a red one with bacon that I got from Pasture Song Farm in Pottstown that I pre-cooked, and then mushrooms from Woodland Jewel, which is a mushroom producer in Spring City, and then some sauteed, almost like fried onions like you'd have on a cheesesteak. So we're going to take, I'd say, 2 healthy spoonfuls of red sauce. This is a sauce that I make and I can, so we always have it in our pantry, and I'll make it maybe every 3 or 4 months because we eat a lot of red sauce in my house. So then you're going to start using your spoon to spread the sauce around. You might have to add a little more in certain places. If you add too much, though, it's better to have less sauce, because then the bottom of the pizza won't get soggy. Then just like that, spread it around. Leave about an inch and a half of crust. This might be a little bit too much sauce. All right, and then we're gonna season with salt all over. And then I always put a sprinkle of Parmesan cheese. And then, I forgot to mention, the oven is preheated to 550, and you just want to preheat your oven to the highest temperature it goes to. 550, 500 will work. And you want that pizza stone on the bottom rack as far down to the bottom as it can go. You want to put the pizza stone in the oven before you turn it on, because if you put a cold pizza stone into an already hot oven, you risk cracking the pizza stone. So you're going to take, this is just shredded mozzarella. You're going to start spreading your cheese around. About the same diameter as the sauce, leaving your crust. I usually go a little bit lighter on the cheese in the middle, just because that's going to be the weakest point of the pizza. All right, and now we're going to add, it doesn't matter the order of the toppings you add. I'm going to add a little bit of bacon, sprinkle it around evenly. This bacon is really nice. It comes from Pasture Song, and they have pasture-raised pork. It's just really, the difference is remarkable compared to something like Hatfield. And then these mushrooms, I sauteed with a little olive oil, salt, and pepper. I didn't fully cook them. I just sort of, these are shiitake and golden oysters. It's a combination of the two. I'm going to use all of these just because it's a nice amount. And then we're going to put some of our fried onions right on top of that. And toppings, really, this is where you can get creative and put whatever you want. I have a towel handy so I can wipe off my hands after touching all the toppings so they're nice and dry. Now, this step, I'm going to make sure that the pizza's not going to stick. It feels a little heavy right now. It's been on the peel because I've been talking to you. Sometimes if that happens, I'll lift up one edge and I'll blow some air under it just to sort of loosen it up. So see how it's like sliding around on the peel? And if you just like jiggle it back and forth like this, you know that it's not going to stick. So now our oven, nice and hot. You're going to open it, get the pizza in as fast as you can and close it so you don't lose that oven temperature. I go about an inch, inch and a half from the back of the pizza stone and then wiggle it off right onto the stone. I set a timer for 4 minutes. And then while that pizza's in the oven, I'm going to start the next pizza. That's because I have 2 peels here that I can use. You're going to need a pizza peel to turn the pizza as it's cooking towards the end to make sure that it cooks evenly. So if you only have 1 pizza peel, I will wait until the first one comes out before you get the second one started.
Don?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, it's kind of hard. I mean, I've seen people use everything from like, and then put the sauce and cheese and cook. You want to make sure you have a good amount of once the garlic cloves are soft enough to smash with garlicky oil that you can just use a pastry brush to spread it and put your cheese and toppings on top of that. So this one's a little bit sticky on the bottom, so I add a little flour. I'm going to do this one faster since we can always go back and watch the first one. this dough is a little overproof, so I'm just gonna skip the step of stretching it on the counter. So if you overwork the dough, sometimes you have issues with it getting stuck. So then you're just gonna do the same thing, leave that inch and a half of crust. Pizza stones, though, you can get those at any kitchen store, and they are really, it's hard to replace the kitchen, like it's hard to substitute for a kitchen stone, pizza stone. So then I did a little bit of salt on the garlic oil, and then I'm doing Parmesan cheese again. Then I'm gonna put, I don't put as much shredded mozzarella on the white pizzas. So you can actually see the dough through. I go a little lighter on the cheese. That's just a personal preference. And then we're going to take, I have some asparagus that I just quickly blanched. So we're gonna take the asparagus, spread that around. Just like that. And then we're gonna add some of that same bacon. Like I said, I'm using the bacon because I cooked a lot of it ahead of time, so we're putting bacon on both. But it's really easy. Pizza is really easy food to make vegetarian. And once summer comes around and you have all those local vegetables coming in from farms, it's really great to utilize those and get creative with the toppings. So now, this one will be ready to go in shortly. I'm going to leave it right here. So that's our timer. So after the 4 minutes is up, you're going to turn your oven off and turn it on to high broil. And I set another timer for 3 minutes. So the residual heat from that pizza stone on the bottom is going to continue cooking the bottom of the pizza while you're going to blast the top with that broiler and get it really nice. And you'll check it after 3 minutes. It might need a spin or two to like make sure that the top is cooking evenly depending on your oven. And then yeah, and then we're just going to cook it to your own personal preference as far as how dark you want the crust and how some people like the cheese a little more crispy on top. So we're going to wait another 3 minutes, I guess. So if there's any other questions, I guess now would be a great time. All right, so some of the toppings, if you use like, sometimes I've tried putting zucchini on pizza, and if you just chop up a zucchini and put it on a pizza, it's really watery, and it's gonna really make the pizza a little sloppy and make it hard to eat. So if I'm using something like that, I will either cook it ahead, like the asparagus I had blanched ahead, the onions, I just prefer the onions a little more cooked, but you can use raw onions if you cut them small enough on a pizza. I've done barbecue chicken pizzas with some red onions that are raw when they go on. And the chicken would be cooked ahead of time and then tossed with barbecue sauce, and then you would just spread it on top of your cheese. But some of those wet toppings, like zucchini especially, I tend to chop it up and then I will toss it in salt and let it sit in a strainer for up to an hour just to let some of that liquid leach out. And then when you go to put it on, you're not left with all that water coming out of the zucchini onto your pizza and making a big mess. All right, so now we have about a minute left on our timer. I'm going to check it just because I'm impatient and I like to look. So we have the back of the pizza in my oven. It cooks faster than the front. So I'm going to spin it a third of the way around, and then I'm just going to put it back in the same spot and just close the door again. And we're going to wait another. My broiler works pretty good, so we're going to wait another like 40 seconds until this timer goes off. If your oven is bigger or taller, then sometimes your broiler will take longer to do this step. I wouldn't recommend moving it up because I've tried rushing the pizza and putting it up higher, and then you don't check it in time and it gets a little too crispy.
Okay, I have 2 questions.
All right, great.
One of them will probably be for more towards the end, but one person would like you to show the recipe again for the dough.
Oh, all right.
And then what was the flour to wheat flour ratio again?
So I do 60% of King Arthur bread flour. Sometimes I do 50-50. I just find that the 60% of the bread flour and the 40% of the whole wheat Castle Valley mill just really adds a lot of character and makes a really nice dough. I've tried it with much higher percentages of Castle Valley, and it just makes a denser dough. And you could just use, when I first started making pizza, we just used plain bread flour, 100% bread flour, and that works just as well too. Really, the overnight fermentation is what's really gonna also add, if you're using just a King Arthur bread flour, the overnight fermentation would enhance that flavor tenfold.
And could you use this dough for a stromboli?
You could. So you would just stretch it out, except everything I said about not touching the crust. With a stromboli, you want the whole thing to be stretched evenly. So then when you fold it over, you're not left with a huge lump of crust on the outside. So you would just press down when you're stretching on that crust and make it as flat as the rest. Then you would, what I would do is I'd put it on the pizza peel. I'd do like exactly like this, except only on half. And maybe I'd bulk it up a little bit more with some more cheese and more ingredients. And then I'd fold it over and pinch the dough closed. All right, so this is the preferred darkness in our household. So we have our bacon's nice and crispy. You can see you got some spots like that bubble was nice and thin, so that got a little bit more crispy. But I'm gonna put it onto a wire rack now to let it cool before I cut it. Hold on one second, I have a young child that is not in bed.
Your sound is still off. Hang on 1 second while I unmute you. Sorry, everyone. The unmute button doesn't want to work. Just hold on.
All right.
Okay, here we are.
Sorry about that. So now after you take this pizza out of the oven, I put it on a wire rack to let it cool a little bit, because if you try to cut it right out of the oven, then the cheese and everything is going to make a big mess. So I let the wire rack lets the air circulate underneath and helps to keep the bottom crispy and not get soggy. So then I switch the oven back to 550 degrees, which is ready to go now. And then our other pizza is ready to go. This one's definitely going to be a little stuck because it's sat here for quite a few minutes now. So let's see if I can. So I think we're good. Yep. And then we put that timer back on for 4 minutes. All right. Now so I can show you how to, it only takes about a minute or two before it's ready to cut. So I'll put it back over here. Usually, so I usually, what I was going to say is I usually cut these pizzas in 8 slices. And then just personal, after I cut the pizzas, I put it back on the wire rack. Because if you do let it sit on the cutting board, it risks getting the bottom soggy. So now let's take a look at this crust. You see we got some nice air bubbles there. And if we didn't add too much toppings, you should be able to hold the pizza like that and not have it get really soggy. This, if it had another minute to set, it'd be perfect.
Okay, we have another question.
All right.
When reheating pizza, do you use the same oven temperature as you first baked it?
No, if the pizza's fully cooked like this, and I mean, there's only 2 of us tonight eating, so there's definitely going to be leftovers, and we'll have some in the fridge tomorrow. Usually I do like 350, 375 and put it right back on that pizza stone. Our pizza stone actually lives in the oven. It's there every day. It never leaves. Oh, and if some people would like to take a little piece of aluminum foil and you can cover the crust, like fold aluminum foil over the crust. So then when you're reheating it, the crust won't get any additional darkness. It'll just heat and not get too crunchy. It'll stay nice and soft and chewy like it was the day before. Does that answer the?
Yes, and we have one attendee that will take all the leftovers.
Oh, okay, absolutely. So we got 2 more minutes for this white pizza before we're gonna switch it to the broiler. And the white pizza, because there's less sauce, it's just the garlic and oil, it will take less time under the broiler. It'll get crispy faster than the red pizza. So we're just gonna, and all your leftovers, like the sauteed onions, I will use on lots of different things. If we're having a salad with chicken and some peppers and onions, I'll saute the peppers with those onions and just.
Okay, another question. Will
All right.
Too much cheese on the pizza make it soggy?
Too much cheese will do 2 things. It will make it soggy on the bottom, and it won't hold up nicely. It'll be harder to eat. So, like, let's see. This slice, I'd say, is perfect. It's got nice, even crust all the way until you get to the end where it's obviously thicker. And then, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and switch. Our timer went off, and I'll switch to the broil. I'll set another timer for 3 minutes just so I don't forget. Usually with the red pies also, at the end, when it comes out of the oven, I'll take a little olive oil and just a quick drizzle around the pizza. That's just a force of habit with, especially if you're doing like a margarita pizza without shredded mozzarella, where you're using balls of fresh mozzarella, and then at the end, it would be red sauce and balls of fresh mozzarella melted, and then you would tear some basil and just drizzle it with olive oil, and that's just really nice on a summer evening outside on the patio.
Okay, what do you do if you tear the dough when you stretch it?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. So if you tear the dough, stop working it and try to put it down on the pizza peel, and then I should have saved a piece of dough to demonstrate a tear. But you can just close the dough and sort of pat it closed. As long as you don't add your toppings, and especially the sauce, if you close the hole before you add that stuff, then you're still be able to get it off the peel, especially if it's a little hole. If it's a big hole, then you're going to have bigger issues because you can't really start over. But yeah, or you could, if you had a big hole, maybe you just cut out that section and just made a smaller pizza. As long as you can slide it off of the peel into the oven, and it should still work. All right, so now I'm going to check this pizza. So we're starting to get a little bit of color. I turned it a third of a turn, but it still definitely needs at least another 2 minutes, and we'll see how it does.
Okay, how would you make a stuffed pizza, like Old Forge white pizza?
So I've never tried it with this dough recipe, and that's because I'm not sure if this recipe is specific to getting the cheese, like blasting it with the broiler. You definitely would not want to broil a pizza that had the dough on top, because then the cheese would not be melted, and the top would get really crispy. So what I would recommend is, if I was doing it, I would take the dough, I would probably stretch it out into a sheet pan that had like a good amount of oil in it, stretch it all out, and then I'd add the cheese. If an Old Forge pizza that I'm familiar with has cheese and rosemary and some onions usually in the white pizzas. So I would add the cheese and onions inside, and then I'd take another dough and I'd put it on top and just press, like crimp around all the edges to make sure it's closed. But I would definitely bake that in a sheet tray. I would not try to do it on a stone, because if the cheese leaks out, if you don't close it enough, then you're just gonna have cheese burning in the oven and it'll be a disaster. So here, we're almost there. I'm just gonna turn it one more time because I like it a little bit darker than that.
What temperature would you do that at?
The Old Forge pizza, I'd probably do around, maybe I'd start it at like 400 and then drop it down to 350 until it gets the color you want. So do like 400 for maybe 8 minutes and then drop the temperature just to like get that crust nice. I didn't mention this, I would brush the top with some olive oil and sprinkle rosemary on it and salt, because you definitely want some like nice flakes of salt, almost like the top almost reminds you of a focaccia, and then it's stuffed with cheese. So that's how I would make focaccia, so I'd probably go about it the same way. All right, so there we go. That's dark enough for this. You can go darker. I mean, we got some nice bubbles there. Oh, I just popped one. And it smells, that garlic coming out of the oven and the bacon combined smells amazing. All right. So we're just gonna let it rest for a minute before we cut it. This one has less cheese, so you can probably cut it sooner, but I still like to let it sit for 45, 60 seconds.
I think this would be a follow-up question to the Old Forge one, where you mentioned using rosemary. Would it be fresh rosemary? Has to be fresh, or can it be dry?
Yeah, I always use fresh rosemary. I've never used dry. So I mean, dry might work, but the fresh rosemary is really going to be more fragrant and give you more of like a flavor bomb, I think. Dried rosemary, I feel like, is better if you're making like if you're braising something, or if you're making like a soup, which is going to get really, like, basically the rosemary will get rehydrated. But for something like a pizza, I always use fresh rosemary. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut this one. There we go. This asparagus one also, I like to, when you put it in the oven right at the beginning, I would crack an egg right in the middle. And then if you start it with an egg right from the beginning, you'll have a nice runny egg when you go to cut it. Right. So let's take a look at this. And we still got some nice, this one probably got, because I've been, we got a nice bubble there. Just, but this dough, I would say, was slightly overproofed. But I mean, it's still totally workable. It's just softer when you go to stretch it, so you gotta be more careful.
I have a question.
All right.
You made those two dough balls from the same original recipe. So how did one get overproofed and the other one didn't? Oh,
so basically in the 10 minutes that they were both a little overproofed, but if 10 or 15 minutes can really make a difference. Like it was a good 10 minutes between the time I got this first one in the oven and by the time I got the second one stretching. So just that extra time out at room temperature really makes a difference. So for example, if you remember from the pre-recorded video, I had that other half of the dough what I did with that one was I cut it into 3 smaller dough balls, and then I made a plain pizza for my kids at 5 o'clock. So what I did was I left that dough out, let it proof, and then I baked plain pizza with that one. And then these 2 dough balls I put in the fridge at around 2 o'clock this afternoon when I portioned and shaped them. And then I pulled them out around 5:30. So I could have probably left them in the fridge until 6 o'clock and pulled them out. So it's all you just have to know that when the dough is ready to go, you have to be ready to go.
Okay, so we have about 9 minutes left before our time is up. And I know one attendee wanted to see the recipe again. So before we leave, if you could put that up for a couple minutes.
Yeah, we're here. I have to take this and
you take that, turn it around, and then you can see yourself.
Oh.
Oh, the joys. Okay.
All right, so you guys can see me now.
Yes.
And my editor, producer / director is going to get the recipe up, and we will. I guess we can share the screen and just keep the video paused on that part so they can write it down if they like.
I see a question about emailing the recording. The recording, well, I apologize. I started it a couple of minutes late, but the recording will go up on the Tredyffrin Library's YouTube channel. So it will be available to watch later.
So you guys can see the recipe now, right?
Yes.
All right, great.
And let's see. Any more questions? Again, does anybody have any more questions, you can put it in the Q&A box or in the chat box. We do have a few more minutes.
What are some of the weirdest things you've ever put out?
I was asked, what are some of the weirdest things I've ever put on a pizza? I don't know. There's been some. Oh, so yeah, maybe a month or two ago, I tried a shakshuka pizza, where I took shakshuka is a Middle Eastern dish where you basically poach eggs in like a spicy tomato sauce. And so I tried doing that on a pizza. I took the sauce, and it also has chickpeas in it and some peppers and onions. And so I had all that as the base of the pizza, and then I cooked an egg on there, and that turned out really well. I don't know if it was weird. It was really messy too because I like my eggs really runny. Are there any other questions?
Nothing has come up in the last moment.
All right.
All right. Well, then I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for Pizza Night, and thank John of Vesta Barbecue and Catering for sharing his knowledge. Like I said, the video recording will go up on our YouTube channel probably sometime next week, Monday probably, and you'll be able to watch it and can collect this recipe again if you forget or lose your paper for it. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and if you guys want to make any pizza and take pictures or anything, put them on social media so we can all see them. And you can tag Vesta Barbecue. That's Vesta_BBQ on Instagram. And then, yeah, I'd love to like repost them in the story and just show people what you guys learned.
All right. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Eat some pizza.
Yeah, we're going to eat some pizza.